And I think the goodness, the giving back of NFIB members and what we see from small business owners in a time of crisis. We saw this, like I said, with the recent pandemic. And these tragic wildfires here in California have been no exception in terms of seeing the stellar persona and the stellar, relationships and community giving that we see from our small business owners.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a bi-weekly podcast with information on independent businesses' victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Tim Goodrich, NFIB's Vice President of State Government Relations and guest host for today's episode. Joining us for today's episode is NFIB member and small business owner Aileen Band, owner of Tropical Manor in Daytona Beach Shores, Florida. Also with us today are California NFIB State Director John Kabateck and Florida NFIB State Executive Director Bill Herrle. Welcome and thank you all for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
In 2022, Florida was hit by Hurricane Ian at an estimated cost of over $100 billion and 156 lives lost. Aileen, could you help us understand how your business was affected and how that recovery process went for you?
Yes, I'm happy to share our experience. I'm the general manager of the Tropical Manor, as you said, in Daytona Beach Shores, Florida. My mother has owned our business for over 70 years. This was the worst natural disaster that has ever occurred, that has ever affected our business. And we were actually impacted by two hurricanes during the fall of 2022, Hurricane Ian in mid-September, and then 6 weeks later by Hurricane Nicole in mid-November. As you just mentioned, this Hurricane Ian was a massive, very powerful hurricane, Category 5. Volusia County, where our business is located, was the second hardest hit area in Florida after Fort Myers. The damage we received at the Tropical Manor was staggering. The initial Hurricane Ian brought very strong winds and rain over a period of 2 days, which damaged all 11 of our roofs and 1/3 of our hotel guest rooms. Then 6 weeks later, after the tides remained very high, the second hurricane struck, Hurricane Nicole, around November 8th, and that is what damaged a lot of our public areas, including our seawall, pool, and sun deck. We did hire a restoration contractor to replace the roofs on all of 11 of our buildings and to restore our severely damaged rooms. The initial response by the contractor was quite timely in covering the roofs and so forth, and mitigating the water damage. But then we found that what was projected to be a 4-month restoration process actually turned out to be 4 times longer, approximately 1.5 years. It did take quite some time to receive insurance proceeds, but we did receive about $1.2 million, and we put in about $1 million, our family, on top of that to cover the very costly exterior repairs that were not covered under insurance. And we're still continuing those repairs right now. And our insurance costs have gone up about 70% since these 2 hurricanes, but we are really relieved to actually be able to continue to obtain property insurance.
Wow, so you were actually hit by 2 hurricanes and 70% increase. That had to be somewhat devastating.
Yes, it really was, definitely.
Okay, well, we'll come back to your story. Thank you for that. John, I want to turn to you now. Californians are in the midst of responding to some of the worst fires in Southern California history. I know this is personal for you as a native of the LA area and that you have friends that have been affected by the devastation. Can you share with us how this has impacted small business owners in the area?
Yeah, sure, Tim. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here and hearing these great stories like Aileen's and harrowing stories, of course. First and foremost, as I look back on this last disaster, and I even kind of hearken back to COVID, as a memory there, I never cease to be amazed and impressed at this courage, this resilience, and I think the goodness, the giving back of NFIB members and what we see from small business owners in a time of crisis. We saw this, like I said, with the recent pandemic. And these tragic wildfires here in California have been no exception in terms of seeing the stellar persona and the stellar, relationships and community giving that we see from our small business owners. When things seem at their worst, these Main Street employers are rising up and they're showing their best. So, it's amazing how much they fight forward and help their own communities. These wildfires that began on January 7th of 2025, are one of the worst disasters in California and the nation's history. To put it into perspective, more than 40,000, about actually close to 60,000 acres across the Southern California Southland were destroyed. 29 people died. $250 billion estimated in economic loss, apparently making it the costliest U.S. disaster, Tim, in U.S. history. And more than 15,000 homes and businesses and other buildings that were damaged or destroyed. And then finally, bringing it home to Main Street, nearly 2,000 brick and mortar small businesses employing upwards of about 12,000 men and women were destroyed or severely damaged. So that's just a rough number. I'm sure based on how many people make their homes their small businesses, as we all know, these days, countless more have been destroyed. And I think that what we really found from small business owners is they faced a world of crisis. Many just flat out lost all of their business that was scorched to the ground. We called members in the fire zones right in the wake of all of this and realized that, we called one of them and they realized the hardware store in Altadena had burned to the ground, just
Wow.
completely. We were trying to track this hardware store owner, Altadena Hardware, a longtime member since the 80s. And then the phone kept going and going. And I went and Googled online, and there it was showing Altadena Hardware sadly just torched to the ground. And, I think so many of them are having a hard time, rebuilding. That's one of the big things right now. And to put it into perspective, it took Lahaina, when Lahaina went through their terrible tragedy, on approximately 18 months just to build their first 5 homes, Tim and everybody. So, those whose businesses still stand, we've talked to a lot of them. They're facing smoke damage, ash damage, and then utilities are still being delayed in getting up and running. We found one member of ours, Tom Sawyer Camps in the Altadena area campground. Their headquarters was not touched in Altadena, but the actual camps, which were adjacent to a lot of these fires, were affected in terms of groundwater and challenges that they're facing with the toxins underground. So the owner of a great longtime member, Tom Horner, basically said the challenge now is they're getting into the camp season. Parents who are now reticent to and very reluctant to want to sign their kids up for camp for concerns about that. And then just a few other quick things, many or most small business owners rent, and they're continuing to get invoices for rent and utilities. We saw this with COVID. So they're pleading for, deferrals, for waivers. And then we're, even though we've got a lot of retail theft fixes from this last election because of a ballot measure, there's still a lot of problems and concerns with looting and scammers and people taking advantage. And then last but not least, I know we've talked a lot about the insurance crisis, and I won't bore people with too much insurance wonkiness, but many have had insurance, but not a lot have had fire insurance. And I think in summary, the California insurance industry was in disarray to begin with, and insurance were stopping the ability to write fire insurance policies even before the fire. And, then to pick up the gap, we have this state plan called the FAIR plan as the insurer of last resort. And the state stepped in, but apparently, still not enough coverage there to handle a major event. And, to his credit, our state insurance commissioner was heading in the right direction to try and make the market healthier again. But then the fires hit. And so, will these claims be paid through the FAIR plan? Yes, but I got to tell you, just barely. I think our lobbyist, Tim Taylor here in California, said we're just one catastrophic event away from creating an irreversible free fall in the insurance market. So a lot of things people are facing. I can certainly go on to what NFIB is doing, but I think they kind of set the table of the challenges small businesses are facing right now.
Thanks, John, for that description. I know you're doing a lot to help members, and you have an upcoming webinar. Could you describe the webinar and some of the things that you're doing to help members?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really proud to have been, our team, both our Sacramento team, but all of the NFIB team nationally, people on the ground and around the state. We've been really front and center since the fires struck. I think, again, we really made sure that we were there to listen. And again, as I said, more than 2,000 small businesses minimum have been affected by this, and more than 12,000 workers displaced or affected just in small business. But, from the get-go, we immediately made a point to call our members. We had members in the Altadena area, the Palisades, Ventura County. The most important thing you always want to first do with NFIB is be in touch with our members, right? Always make sure that we're listening, talking, and checking in on them, especially in times of tragedy. So we made those phone calls, checked in to see what they needed, how they're doing, and continuing to keep those lines going. In addition to that, we were on the phone within the first 24 hours with the governor's office and local officials. We talked to them, and they made a commitment to us, and we've made a commitment to them to continue to be at the table. So we've been having regular meetings to say, look, small business owners need to be at the table. And we've been getting regular calls back from both the state capitol and at the local level saying, look, what can we do? How can we help? And of course, with the SBA, which has been fantastic. You mentioned, Tim, that we're going to be doing webinars. We've been both pushing out regularly every single Monday information to our members on resources that are available to them through the SBA, the Small Business Development Centers, local organizations. We do that through something we call the Main Street Minute that we send out to our members every Monday. And we've been hearing that that's been very helpful. But then we've also lining up with the governor's senior executive team within the week and on a regular basis, webinars with them. We're going to get a call with the governor's small business team and economic development team, as well as folks with the Los Angeles County Business Federation. NFIB works really great. While we are state and federal in our focus, we realize that a lot of things happen locally that we need to be in touch. So we're going to be doing a call involving both Los Angeles County Business Federation team, which we're a good part of, as well as the governor's team, and making sure our members have a chance to both learn about the resources, know what's there, hear about what's being done in Sacramento to help affect change, and then, most importantly, give them a chance to be heard. And then last but not least, Tim, I'll just say it's what our members have been doing that's most harrowing. This is the coolest part. I talked about Tom Sawyer Camps that's been facing their challenges. They've been using their parking lot as base camp for FEMA in Altadena. There's a restaurant called Monty's in the Pacific Palisades that from the very start has been feeding the first responders and displaced families. And even outside of the Southern California region, we have a member of our own NFIB Leadership Council who called and said he's a chef. He actually has a catering business. He said, what can I do to help? I want to get on a plane and fly down and volunteer and prep and donate inventory to families down there. So NFIB staff and our resources have been great, and we're there. But what, again, I'm so proud of and excited to see are these members rising up. Members like Aileen and these other members here who aren't giving up, but actually are giving back. And it's pretty cool.
Those are great stories, John. Thanks for sharing those. I want to
you.
turn to you now, Bill. Small businesses in Florida are still recovering from multiple hurricanes from last year. Can you explain NFIB's process to assist our members who are impacted by these disasters?
Yeah, first and right away, and then more of it. But gosh, after listening to my counterpart in California, my good friend John, I don't know which disaster is worse, fires or hurricanes. And my heart does go out to you, and I know you guys will do great through the recovery. But our history with disasters goes back pretty far in Florida. It's a part of our geography here to be at risk for tropical storms. And I think as we're talking about how challenging this is, we do need to keep in perspective just how far we all have come in disaster preparedness. When I look back at Hurricane Andrew in 1992, ancient history, how far we have come, and the most important thing of all, and that's saving lives and preventing unnecessary deaths. And while we mourn every death in a disaster, I think we've really made some tremendous bounds in that, in how people react and plan for disasters. And that's the first key to any business, is have a plan, have a plan, have a plan. But NFIB does what we can in first and immediately during Hurricane Michael that tore through the Panhandle. And a couple of my staff members loaded up a big truck full of gas tanks and as much fuel as they could carry in the back of a truck and headed over to little old Marianna, Florida. It was heavily hit and was only about an hour and a half away from Tallahassee. And we immediately started dispersing fuel to some of our members who were operating on generators. And I know in at least one instance that involved the only small independent pharmacy that was functioning within maybe a 40-mile radius. So sure, We're going to do what we can if we're within reach immediately. Organizationally, Florida has a very strong infrastructure to prepare and react to disasters, and NFIB is a member of the state emergency response team, the CERT team. That means that as a disaster unfolds, and I suppose we have the small benefit of seeing these things coming days ahead of time, we'll be on conference calls with the CERT team, getting updates every 2 hours around the clock if necessary. So sometimes we have a little bit more information than others that we can disperse to our members. And of course, we do that. We do that through email e-casts to our members. And of course, we keep our pages up to date with, the obvious things that everyone knows and should be doing. Make sure you have your insurance policy secure, and so forth, but also the unfolding executive orders. React to a disaster. Things happen very quickly, and we're among the first to get the governor's executive orders that can impact everything about a business. Number one, whether they can be open or not, how they can function, and transportation needs, road closures, and so forth. So we do everything we can, from actual hands-on assistance to making sure we're plugged in with one of the best disaster response teams in the nation, I believe.
Thanks, Bill. I am struck by your comments about plan. When you listen to stories, I think the common denominator is I never thought it would happen to me. So thank you for sharing that. Let's take a quick short break to hear an ad for our members.
9 out of 10 small businesses are facing a massive tax hike at the end of this year. Without action from Congress, the 20% small business deduction will expire in December. Ask your tax advisor how much your business is deducting each year and tell Congress to make the deduction permanent at smallbusinessdeduction.com.
Welcome back to the show. We know that small business owners are resilient, and we've heard many stories about that today. And Aileen, your story certainly exemplifies that. With that in mind, I'm wondering if you have any advice for small business owners who are battling the challenges of these recent disasters.
Thank you for asking. Right. I think one of the things that we would have done differently prior to the hurricanes was to really very carefully review our property insurance policies, make sure that we were adequately insured, and making any adjustments prior to hurricane season. We did have some co-insurance penalties that were reflected in our insurance claim payments, and I think that was probably the biggest mistake that we had made. But I would again say just please carefully look at your property insurance policies before your seasons of bad weather approach, just to make sure you're properly covered.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Insurance seems to be a topic that is common in Florida and California. Bill and John, I'm going to ask you first, but could each of you elaborate on how NFIB is involved in the legislative response during and after these disasters in your states?
Absolutely. Well, this is John Kabateck from California. Yeah, we for sure have been very engaged in this effort. I think, as I mentioned, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done in the area of our insurance market. So we have been working closely with a coalition of about 25 to 30 other business groups statewide and locally, pushing hard to make sure that there is adequate insurance, that there is funding for insurance, that we can make sure that these businesses owners, and frankly, California homeowners, can have, right? It's an important issue with so many at-home businesses, Tim. So that's important. Unfortunately, we have to play a little bit of defense, and we have to kind of, this is sad, but, we've got some legislation where we're actually having to push back. It's unfortunate to see people kind of taking an ill-guided approach here. But for example, there is a legislator out of San Francisco, not even in this Los Angeles area, who has introduced legislation recently that would open the door to allow private right of action lawsuits by including the insurance industry and everyday Californians to sue the oil industry. Basically, there's this allegation that the industry, did nothing to help mitigate climate change, which ultimately caused these fires. So even folks on the left and the right have been saying this is an absurd bill, but it seems to have been getting a little bit of traction. So in that case, yes, we are pushing to make sure the insurance industry, that there is funding for the people file these claims, that they can get the help they need. Sadly, not surprising, in California, we're also having to push back on silly legislation that is ill-focused, misguided, and frankly is an insult to people who are trying to really get back on their feet. So that's the thing. It's a real insult. In addition to that, we are actually trying to work hard. There's a lot of fire relief legislation being introduced. The governor and the legislature have been supporting efforts to waive our environmental quality laws. In California, what's called CEQA for years has been a real hamstring to development in general in California. But even the governor and even the legislators on both sides of the aisle have been working hard to waive or at least delay a lot of these CEQA challenges. So that's been an issue. So we've been pushing hard to make sure that permitting is streamlined, it's expedited. And then, we're actually just also trying to do what we can to just help identify opportunities at the statewide and local level that will get these people the help they need. One of the biggest challenges right now is, again, hiring personnel to process the permitting. We've been finding that to be a big challenge. So we are looking at a lot of that. And then finally, we are heartened to see the governor has been he's basically been spending most of his days in the Southern Cal region, which is the right thing to do. I think while people may call politics, we're grateful that the governor's down there. We want to make sure that he and every leader is doing everything they can to expedite the redevelopment, the rebuilding. And finally, I'll just give a shout out to the hotels and the Airbnb industry. The hospitality industry, from the small owners that we represent, a lot of them, to the medium and large lodging industry folks have been amazing in opening up their doors to house the displaced families, put first responders in a place. Amazing to see that. So we're across the board, Tim. We're just trying to make sure the insurance market gets back on track, streamlining permitting, and most importantly, giving these people a chance. But unfortunately, in California, we do actually have to kind of push back, making sure small business and frankly, all Californians have a chance to rebound and rebuild.
That's great. Thank you, John. Bill?
Yeah, in Florida, we have a lot of challenges in our insurance market. And boy, I was so struck by Aileen's comment that she has seen a 70% increase in her insurance, yet her attitude is she's just so grateful to have it. And just let that sink in for a minute and realize what a challenge that is to business owners. So we tackle this issue as a top priority in Tallahassee, and we were deeply engaged in the 2023 tort reform effort. That I do have to say that in the dialogue on that, the challenge that we face in rebuilding areas of this state time and time again were forefront on legislators' minds as they decided how they were going to go on this issue. Fortunately, we had a strong majority of them support it. But let these numbers sink in with you for a minute. Prior to the Tort Reform Act of 2023, despite all of our challenges with Mother Nature in Florida, Florida really had about 10% of all the homeowners claims in the nation. That's about on par course for the size of Florida among the 50 states. And yet Florida had 80% of the litigation surrounding homeowners insurance.
Wow.
So 10% of the market, yet 80% of the market when it came to litigation. Now, a lot of times we didn't have to argue any further than demonstrating those numbers. And those are hard and fast numbers that come from our insurance commissioner in Florida. We knew there was a very deep systemic problem we had to repair. And I think we did. I believe that what we passed was very strong. And yet it is like trying to turn around an aircraft carrier or a couple aircraft carriers around in a bathtub. It has been several years now since we've passed it, and we only now are starting to see some very strong indicators that the insurance market is recovering. We are seeing carriers move into the state. We are seeing very marginal rate reductions. Of course, that's on years of staggering increases. And we're also seeing our residual market, the insurer of last resort, known as Citizens in Florida, start to reduce their share of the market. So we have a lot of confidence that what we did in 23 is going to correct the problem, but it's going to take some years moving down the road. We know that we can handle this. I've had among the best actuaries in the world say, listen, if it's simply a matter of insuring the people's homes and businesses, and if it's simply a matter of restoring and rebuilding those, we can have a stable and cost-effective market. It really is litigation that unfortunately is driving a lot of these costs. And I have to say, delaying recovery. If I may go down a different line for just a moment, Tim, of all the things that business owners need after a disaster, and just like John Kabateck, I've made those calls. I've been on the ground. I've canvassed for our members following a disaster. And even for the state emergency response team, we've taken informal inventories. They want to know what businesses are opening and functioning. And as I talk to business owners following a disaster, you know what their number one need is? Customers. And boy, doesn't
Sure.
that say everything about free enterprise. Small business owners can endure just about anything. They can endure a flood, they can endure a tidal surge, they can endure fires, they can rebuild. But once they're at that point, there's absolutely no substitute for a general flow of commerce and those customers walking back in the door.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And if you'd like to learn more about Bill's story, getting that legislation passed, we had Bill on in an earlier episode going in depth into that story. Before we go, I'd like to ask Aileen if there's anything else that she would like to add.
Yes, I would really like to say again that my mother and I are very proud that we have been members of NFIB for over 50 years. It's been a very rewarding experience for us to participate in your programs. We especially like the annual Small Business at the Florida Capitol event that's held every year. It's been a fantastic opportunity to meet some very important people who are helping businesses. For example, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and U.S. Attorney General Pamela Bondi. And we really love the fact that there is such a broad variety of businesses in NFIB. We like meeting other business owners. And we really particularly, appreciate how Bill definitely called us. I remember his phone call right after the hurricane. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you need? I can help. I think he actually called us several times to check on us. So knowing that, we were really being thought of, and if there was anything we needed, that he would be right there to help us. So we appreciate that very much. And also, yes, we are in business. We are open for business at the Tropical Manor, beautiful location on the oceanfront in Daytona Beach Shores, Florida, and hope that some of you may be able to come down and stay with us at the Tropical Manor.
Well, it's 15 degrees here in D.C., so we'd all love to be there right now, Aileen.
I can say I have been a guest at the Tropical Manor, and you're really missing something if you travel to Florida, anywhere in the Central Florida area, and don't get to stay at the Tropical Manor, because it is just a really, really special place.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Bill. Really appreciate that. And we are actually number one on TripAdvisor in all the hotels in Daytona Beach Shores, and that's a pretty great accomplishment for a family-owned and operated independent hotel.
Well, thank you for your membership. Appreciate that. Let's stay in Florida, Bill. Do you have anything else to add?
God bless the small business owners of America. It's terrible to see, and I myself have lost a home to a hurricane, and I know the feeling. It's quite humbling, but nothing is more inspiring than seeing small business owners dust themselves off and get back into the fray. So NFIB stands ready to assist our members, whatever the disaster may be, to help you interface with government resources. And when it's all done and settled, to get into the legislative arena and make sure that our state as a whole is even better prepared the next time around, because sadly, inevitably, there will be another round of something coming at us.
Well said, Bill. Appreciate that. John?
Yeah, I'll kind of tag on to what Bill said. I think, when I first started at NFIB, gosh, more than a decade ago, the woman who was one of our chairs, one of the earlier chairs at the time, said something to me that always stuck with me. She said, when you're at NFIB, the great thing about it is you get a good feeling that you are not alone, that there's a lot of small business owners out there that feel like they're out there alone, isolated on an island, and NFIB gives them that feeling of community, of identity, of security. And so I'm really proud about NFIB, and that I want to remind the listeners to know, whether it's, the tragedy that we've experienced here with our wildfires, terrible hurricanes and challenges that I know Aileen and Bill have faced in Florida or anywhere, is that, we are a great place, and a great place to let you know that you're not alone, that we have the resources and we have the community of fellow members of small business that are there. And I think that's the coolest part, that I think Bill was talking about, the resilience and the people who really are just like dust themselves off. I also thought of this word, which was philanthropreneur. It's kind of a philanthropist and an entrepreneur. How many people we saw during COVID across the nation, Tim, and that were not just small business owners who dusted themselves off and they made it work, but how many of them gave back to their community? I think we're seeing that in Florida. We're seeing that here. People who have been helping back. Aileen, even as you, whatever you're doing out there, you are in your own way giving back to your community by creating jobs, fighting the good fight, helping to feed the economy. And so every one of you out there is a philanthropreneur. And that's the cool part about these crises. You really see the incredible, bold perseverance and creativity, but kindness and the great hearts that you see through small business. So on that note, really excited and just grateful to be here. And I know we'll rebuild on every coast. And that's the important thing to remember.
Well, thanks, John. And as that word, pun intended, takes like wildfire, we will make sure that you get all the credit.
How do you spell that, John?
Oh, give me a little time. I'll send you a note. We'll text it out.
I really want to thank each of you, Aileen, Bill, and John, for joining us today. It's been an honor to hear your stories. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
In today's show notes, listeners will find links to learn more about NFIB's efforts to pass pro-small business policies so that small business owners can get back to running their businesses as quickly as possible. You'll also find links to learn more about the small business news, advocacy efforts, and resources in California, Florida, and each of the 50 states. Now I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks, bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a business owner or a supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.